The condensation from a water glass traced a perfect, ephemeral circle on the polished mahogany. For Elara Vance, these tiny details were the whole world. She was a ghost in a starched black apron, her existence measured in polished silverware and the precise angle of a wine glass. Here, at the pinnacle, perched 60 floors above the glittering nervous system of New York City, she was paid to be invisible. Then he walked in. Not just a man, but a landmark. Alistair Finch, a name whispered with the kind of reverence usually reserved for federal holidays or market crashes. He didn't just own buildings, he owned skylines. And tonight, he was with him, Marcus Thorne, the man who had taken her life and refashioned it into a masterpiece of his own. Marcus was laughing, a sound as smooth and expensive as the cashmere of his coat. His laugh was a performance, designed to charm, to disarm, to conquer. He caught her eye as she approached their table, and a cruel, knowing smirk flickered across his lips, before vanishing. He was acknowledging their shared, rotten history. Finch, however, didn't even register her presence. His eyes, the color of a winter sky, were fixed on a tablet Marcus was sliding across the table. The final piece of the puzzle, Alistair, Marcus purred, his voice a symphony of self-satisfaction. The Verrazzano chart, authenticated, verified, and ready to come home. Finch grunted, a sound of profound skepticism. He was old money, the kind that had been fossilized into a permanent state of unimpressed granite. He poked at the high-resolution image on the screen. "It's a pretty picture, Marcus. So was the last one you brought me. And my own authenticator found it was a clever fake from the 19th century. An unfortunate error by a lesser expert," Marcus said smoothly, waving a dismissive hand. "This time, I oversaw the provenance myself. It's ironclad, the capstone of your family's collection, the very map that brought your ancestors to this harbor." The air crackled with the weight of millions of dollars and centuries of history. Elara moved silently, filling their water glasses, her movements economical and precise, but her eyes were drinking in the image on the screen, the swirl of the coastlines, the faded ink, the mythical creatures frolicking in the Atlantic. It was a language she knew better than English. It was the language that had once been her life and her ruin. Marcus, basking in the glow of his prize, decided to play with his food. He gestured toward Elara. "Everyone's a critic, of course. I'm sure even our lovely server here has an opinion on 16th century vellum." He smiled, a predator's gleam in his eye. He was enjoying this, the sheer, crushing irony of her serving him while he sold a piece of history she had once taught him about. Alistair Finch, annoyed by the sycophantic display, turned his cold gaze on Elara for the first time. He saw a young woman in her late 20s, her face pale under the restaurant's artful lighting, her hands steady despite the circumstances. He saw nothing remarkable. He decided to call Marcus's bluff. "All right then," Finch said, his voice a low rumble. "You heard the man. Let's have the expert opinion of the waitstaff. Tell me, miss, what's your name?" He glanced at her name tag. "Vance. Tell me, Miss Vance, is this map real? Is it worth the small fortune this man is charging me?" The room didn't freeze, but a pocket of intense silence formed around their table. Marcus's smile was wide and mocking. He was waiting for her to stammer, to apologize, to shrink back into the invisibility she was paid for. He was waiting for the final, satisfying twist of the knife. But Elara Vance didn't flinch. She didn't look away. She simply leaned forward slightly, her gaze fixed on the tablet, and her next words would not just shatter the moment, but excavate a 3-year-old grave, proving that the most dangerous secrets are often hidden in the most forgotten places. The scent of seared scallops and old power was the permanent perfume of the pinnacle. It was a smell Elara had come to associate with a quiet, grinding form of erasure. Here, in the heart of the city, the pinnacle was less a restaurant and more a secular confessional for the titans of industry. Deals that shaped the world were made over the lobster thermidor, and careers were silently executed over the dessert cart. Elara, service number 34, was a silent witness to it all, a curator of secrets she was never meant to understand. Her shift began, as it always did, in the stark, fluorescent-lit basement. The staff locker room buzzed with the low-grade anxiety of impending service. Elara was an island of calm. While others gossiped, she sat on a small bench, a worn, leather-bound notebook open on her lap, sketching the intricate pattern of a wine stain on the concrete floor. It was a habit, a compulsion. She didn't sketch things. She deconstructed them, her pencil tracing the lines of their creation, their decay. Her manager, Mr. Dubois, a man whose posture was as rigid as his standards, strode past. "Vance, stop your doodling. Table 7's profile. Finch. He wants the Chateau Margaux opened precisely 20 minutes before he arrives. Not 19, not 21. He'll know. And he doesn't like to be spoken to unless spoken to first. You are to be a shadow." "Yes, Mr. Dubois. 20 minutes. "A shadow," Elara replied, her voice a practiced, placid monotone. Inside, her mind was cataloguing the instruction, filing it away. Alistair Finch, a name she knew not from the society pages, but from the footnotes of auction catalogues. A collector of immense wealth and legendary discernment. He was a shark in a sea of wealthy fish, and tonight he was swimming in her section. Elara was a phantom, haunting the ruins of a life that had once been incandescently bright. Just 3 years ago, she was Dr. Elara Vance, the youngest curator in the history of the Metropolitan Museum of Art's Cartography Department. Her doctoral thesis on identifying chemical signatures in Renaissance-era pigments was considered revolutionary. She could glance at a portolan chart and tell you not just the year it was made, but the region of Italy the vellum came from, and the trade route that supplied the artist's lapis lazuli. She didn't just see maps, she saw stories of commerce, chemistry, and lies. And then, in a single, catastrophic week, it was all incinerated. A newly acquired masterpiece, a 16th-century map of the New World, which she had been tasked with authenticating, was declared a forgery. Not just a forgery, but a modern, almost insulting one. The fallout was swift and brutal. The museum's reputation was savaged. Accusations flew, and the evidence, planted with the meticulous care of a master strategist, pointed directly at her. Myriad anonymous tips to the press highlighted her youth and inexperience. A crucial preliminary analysis report from her computer, which would have flagged the inconsistencies, was found to have been deleted. There was a board inquiry, a quiet but merciless dismissal. She was professionally excommunicated, her name a toxic whisper in the hushed halls of academia and auction houses. The man who had been her mentor, her champion, the one who had brought the map to the museum in the first place, Dr. Marcus Thorne, had publicly expressed his profound disappointment. He spoke of betrayal, of a brilliant mind led astray by ambition. He was the one who, a month later, was lauded for discovering the forgery himself, saving the museum from further embarrassment, and cementing his own reputation as a guardian of artistic integrity. He had built his throne on the ashes of her career. Now she was here. Her name was just Elara. Her most complex daily task was remembering the nuances of 7 different preparations of coffee. The irony was a physical weight, a constant pressure behind her sternum. She, who had once held history in her gloved hands, was now invisible. "Vance, focus!" Mr. Dubois' voice was a whip crack. "The Finch party is confirmed. Table 7, primary service. You!" Elara's stomach clenched into a tight, cold knot. Table 7. The best and worst table in the house. A corner booth offering a panoramic view of the city lights, designed for privacy and the exercise of power. And the Finch party meant Marcus Thorne. She'd seen his name on the reservation as Finch's guest. She had prayed it was a different Marcus Thorne. A dentist, perhaps. An accountant. But she knew it wasn't. She took a steadying breath. It was just another table. Just another man. She spent an hour in the wine cellar, selecting the Margot, her hand steady as she wiped the fine layer of dust from the bottle's shoulders. She polished the silver for table 7 until her own reflection, warped and fragmented, was all she could see. She was a ghost. Ghosts were good at being unseen. The doors opened at 7 o'clock sharp. The low thrum of the city's elite filled the room, the clink of heavy crystal, the murmur of powerful voices, the whisper of silk against leather. Elara moved through it all with the practiced grace of a dancer, a ballet of silent service. She delivered a muse's bouche, refilled glasses, described the provenance of the Japanese A5 Wagyu with a serene, detached smile. At 8:15, the atmosphere in the room subtly changed. A current of cold air, a shift in the gravitational field. Alistair Finch had arrived. He didn't walk in. He made an entrance by his sheer lack of effort. He was a man in his late 70s, tall and gaunt, dressed in a simple, perfectly tailored navy suit that likely cost more than her car. His face was a roadmap of shrewd decisions and deep-seated impatience. He was followed by Marcus Thorne, who was the polar opposite. Marcus was all warmth and charisma, smiling at the hostess, his hand resting proprietorially on Finch's shoulder. He looked vibrant, successful, a man at the absolute peak of his powers. Mr. Dubois led them personally to table 7. He caught Elara's eye as he passed. Shadow, Vance. Not a single mistake. Elara smoothed her apron, picked up her silver tray, and walked toward the table where her past and present were about to collide. The moment she approached, the air felt dense, pressurized. Finch was already studying the wine list, his expression grim, as if searching for an error. Marcus, however, looked directly at her. His smile was a masterpiece of condescension. It said, "Look at you. Look at me." "Good evening, gentlemen," Elara said, her voice a perfect, neutral instrument. "My name is Elara, and I will be your server. May I begin with some water for the table?" Marcus answered for them both. "A bottle of the Panna, still, and Mr. Finch is ready to see the Margot." His eyes lingered on her for a fraction of a second too long, a silent assertion of his victory. Finch didn't look up from the wine list. 20 minutes, as instructed. 21, sir, to be exact. "I opened it the moment your car was spotted at the curb," Elara replied. Finch finally looked up, a flicker of surprise in his cold eyes. It was the correct answer, showing initiative beyond the instruction. He gave a curt, almost imperceptible nod. "Acceptable." Elara retreated. The first test was passed. She returned with the water, then the wine. She performed the ritual with the practiced hands of a surgeon, presenting the cork, pouring a small tasting amount for Finch. He swirled it, sniffed it, and took a small sip. He held the wine in his mouth for a long moment before swallowing. "It will do," he said, which from Alistair Finch was the equivalent of a standing ovation. As she filled their glasses, their conversation, which had paused for the ritual, resumed. They made no effort to lower their voices. They operated under the assumption that no one listening could possibly matter? They were discussing the Verrazzano chart. "The paperwork is flawless," Marcus was saying, pushing his tablet toward Finch. "I've traced it back to the estate of a minor Florentine noble. It was hidden away for centuries. My sources in Geneva handled the acquisition discreetly. No auction, no publicity." "Your sources are expensive," Finch grumbled, scrolling through the images. "The best always are," Marcus replied. "Look at the detail, the vellum, the pigments. It's a work of art, Alistair, the birth certificate of your family's legacy in this country." Elara, clearing the bread plates, felt a tremor in her hand. His sources, his expertise. He was using her own words, her own research, phrases she had taught him in the dusty archives of the museum. He was selling her knowledge back to the world. She kept her face a placid mask. She was a waitress. She was there to take their order. "Are you ready to order, gentlemen?" Finch was annoyed by the interruption. He pointed a long, bony finger at the menu. "The Dover sole, Meunière. Not too much butter. And tell the chef if it's even slightly overcooked, I'm sending the entire kitchen back to culinary school." Marcus ordered the venison with a flourish. Elara recited the order back flawlessly, including Finch's threat, which she rephrased as, "The Dover sole, prepared Meunière, lightly done. Understood." For the next hour she served them. She orbited their sphere of influence, refilling their wine, clearing their plates, all while they finalized the transfer of a historical artifact built on a foundation of lies. Marcus was a master salesman, weaving a tale of history and destiny. Finch was a reluctant buyer, probing for weaknesses, his skepticism a shield against the world's charlatans. It was during the cheese course that Marcus decided to escalate his cruel game. He was showing Finch another document on his tablet, a spectrographic analysis of the map's ink. "You see, the iron gall ink is a perfect match for the period. The chemical degradation is exactly what we'd expect," Marcus explained, his voice resonant with authority. "It's scientifically irrefutable." Finch grunted. "Science can be bought, just like anything else." He looked up, his gaze sweeping the room, and it landed on Elara as she refilled his water glass. He seemed to notice, for the first time, the intense, unwavering focus in her eyes as she glanced at the screen. A strange, mischievous impulse took hold of the old billionaire. He was tired of Marcus's polished certainty. "What do you think?" Finch asked, his voice cutting through Marcus's presentation. Marcus paused, confused. "What do I think about what?" "Not you," Finch said, his eyes still on Elara. "Her. She seems fascinated. Let's get a third opinion." He then turned to Marcus, a dry, mocking smile on his lips. "After all, Marcus, you always say that art should be for everyone, not just the elite. Let's democratize the process." This was the moment Marcus chose to be clever, to be cruel. "An excellent idea, Alistair," he said, his smile dripping with false magnanimity. He turned to Elara. "I'm sure even our lovely server here has an opinion on 16th century vellum." Then came Finch's challenge, the one that hung in the air like a guillotine. "All right then. Tell me, Miss Vance, is this map real?" The humiliation was the point. To reduce her, the true expert, to a source of casual amusement. To have her stand there, mute and powerless, while he closed the deal of a lifetime on the very subject he had stolen from her. This was the moment the ghost in the machine decided it had haunted the halls of silence long enough. Elara did not apologize. She did not step back. She stood very still, and the carefully constructed facade of the deferential waitress dissolved. Her posture straightened, the slight, apologetic slump in her shoulders vanishing. Her expression, which had been placid and professionally blank, sharpened into something intensely focused, analytical, and dangerous. She looked past Marcus, directly at Alistair Finch. "You're right to be skeptical, Mr. Finch," she said. Her voice was not loud, but it had a new timbre, a resonance of authority that cut through the restaurant's low hum. Science can't be bought, but it can be misinterpreted, or in this case, selectively presented. Finch's eyebrows rose. This was not the response he had expected. Marcus let out a short, nervous laugh. "My dear, I don't think you understand." Elara ignored him. Her gaze remained locked on Finch. "Mr. Thorne is correct about the iron gall ink. It's a convincing formulation," she said, her voice steady. "But the ink isn't the most important lie on this map. The lie is the color of the water." Finch leaned forward, his skepticism warring with a newfound curiosity. "Go on." "The blue pigment used for the Atlantic Ocean," Elara said, taking a half-step closer, pointing a single, steady finger at the tablet. "He's calling it azurite, which would be period correct. But it's not. Look at the uniformity of the color, the lack of crystalline structure, even in this high-resolution image. It's too perfect, too smooth." She paused, letting the silence stretch. "That's not azurite. It's Prussian blue, a synthetic pigment. It's beautiful, stable, and chemically indistinguishable from azurite in a basic spectrographic analysis if you don't know what to look for. But it has one fatal flaw." Marcus's face had gone from amused to alarmed. "This is ridiculous. Alistair, she's a waitress." "What flaw?" Finch barked, cutting him off. "Its invention date," Elara said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "Prussian blue was first synthesized in Berlin in 1706, 182 years after Verrazzano sailed into this harbor." A heavy, profound silence descended on the table. It was as if a black hole had opened up, sucking in all the sound and air. Marcus Thorne's face was a mask of disbelief, the blood draining from it until it was the color of old parchment. He looked from Elara to Finch, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. But Elara wasn't finished. She had waited 3 years for this. She turned her cool, analytical gaze on the man who had ruined her. "There's also the issue of the cartouche on the lower right," she continued, her voice devoid of emotion. "The depiction of the sea monster. The style is wrong. It's too flamboyant, too mannerist. It's a direct copy of the Cetus from the Cornelis de Jode map of 1593. The forger was skilled, but lazy. He mixed his centuries." She took a step back, her work done. She looked at Finch. The vellum is real 16th century vellum, likely scraped from an old book of liturgical music. The ink is a clever recipe, but the map is a fake. An expensive, beautifully executed, and utterly worthless fake. I would estimate it was created in the last 5 years. Finch stared at her, his face unreadable. He wasn't looking at a waitress anymore. He was looking at an expert. He had spent his life surrounded by people who told him what he wanted to hear, who padded their expertise with jargon. He had just heard the clean, cold, undeniable ring of truth. Marcus finally found his voice. It was a strangled, desperate sound. She's lying. This is insane. Alistair, she's a disgruntled former intern of mine. I had to let her go for incompetence 3 years ago. She's clearly unstable, holding a grudge." He was flailing, throwing anything he could at the wall, hoping something would stick. But it was too late. Elara had not presented an opinion. She had presented a series of verifiable facts. Finch slowly turned his gaze from Elara to Marcus. The temperature at the table dropped another 20 degrees. The look in the old man's eyes was not one of anger. It was something far worse. It was the look of a man who realized he had been played for a fool, a man whose intelligence had been profoundly insulted. "A disgruntled intern," Finch repeated, his voice dangerously soft. "You told me you authenticated this piece yourself, Marcus, that you oversaw the provenance. Yet a waitress in a restaurant, can dismantle it in 30 seconds with facts I can have verified with a single phone call." He let the accusation hang in the air, a glittering, venomous thing. "I believe, Mr. Thorne," Ilara said, the slightest hint of a smile touching her lips for the first time. "The term for this is catastrophic provenance failure. It's a phrase you taught me yourself." The final, personal blow landed. Marcus physically recoiled as if he'd been struck. Finch's face was a thundercloud. He slowly, deliberately, folded his linen napkin and placed it on the table. He looked at Marcus, his eyes like chips of ice. "The deal is off. My lawyers will be in touch with yours regarding the deposit and your fraudulent claims." Then he turned to Ilara. He pulled a slim, severe-looking business card from his jacket and placed it on the table next to her silver tray. "My office. Tomorrow morning. 9 o'clock. Don't be late." Without another word, Alistair Finch stood up and walked out of the restaurant, leaving Marcus Thorne standing alone at the table, a statue of public humiliation in a $5,000 suit. The entire dining room was watching, pretending not to watch. Ilara stood by the table for a moment, the black business card a stark rectangle against the white linen. Then, with a steady hand, she began to clear the plates. The alley behind the pinnacle was a different world. It smelled of wet cardboard, stale grease, and the ghosts of last night's champagne. It was 1:45 a.m., and Ilara's shift had ended the moment Alistair Finch had walked out the door. Mr. Dubois had cornered her by the service station, his face pale with a mixture of terror and awe. "You're fired, Vance," he'd whispered, unable to meet her eye. "Clean out your locker. You can't create a scene like that with a patron like Finch and expect to keep your job." "It wasn't a scene," Ilara had replied calmly. "It was an expert consultation." She hadn't argued. It didn't matter. The thought of polishing another fork, of arranging another microgreen, had become physically unbearable. She walked out of the service entrance and into the damp alley, her few belongings in a canvas tote bag. A long, dark Bentley was parked at the mouth of the alley, its engine idling with a nearly silent hum. It was an automotive predator, sleek and menacing. She had assumed Finch would have just sent a car for her in the morning. She hadn't expected him to wait. As she drew level with the car, the rear door swung open. "Get in!" The voice from within was Finch's. It was not a request. Ilara sighed, the cold night air biting at her cheeks. She adjusted the strap of her tote bag and slid onto the ridiculously soft leather seat. The door closed with a heavy, satisfying thud, sealing them in a capsule of profound silence, insulated from the city's endless noise. Alistair Finch sat opposite her, a severe silhouette against the streetlights. The interior of the car was lit only by the faint glow of the dashboard. He looked older than he had in the restaurant, the lines on his face carved deeper by fatigue and fury. The car pulled away from the curb as smoothly as a ship leaving port. "Who are you?" he asked. It was the same essential question as before, but the mockery was gone, replaced by a raw, impatient demand for the truth. "I told you," she said, her voice even. "Ilara Vance." "Don't play games with me," he snapped. "The woman I just saw in that restaurant was not a waitress. She was a killer. You took Marcus Thorne apart like he was a cheap watch. I want to know who you are, what you were to him, and why you chose my dinner table to stage your revenge." He had been busy. In the hour since he'd left the restaurant, He had clearly made some calls. "You've had a background check run on me," she stated. "It wasn't a question. A preliminary one," he admitted. "It told me very little. Dr. Ilara Vance, a promising academic career that fell off a cliff 3 years ago. A scandal at the Met. Forgery. Disgraced. Blacklisted. Now tell me the part the internet doesn't know." Ilara looked out the window, watching the blur of city lights. For 3 years, she had never spoken of it to anyone. The shame and the injustice had been a private, festering wound. But now, sitting across from the one man who might actually understand, the story began to unfold. "Marcus wasn't just my colleague," she began, her voice low. "He was my mentor. I was his research assistant at Columbia before he sponsored my placement at the Met. He was charismatic, brilliant. I trusted him completely. My specialty was, and is, forensic cartography, identifying forgeries through material science, pigments, vellum, ink decay, watermarks. It was my entire world." Finch listened, his steepled fingers resting against his thin lips, his eyes never leaving her face. "Marcus was ambitious," she continued. "He wanted to be a kingmaker in the art world. He knew how to find wealthy patrons, how to speak their language, but his scholarship was thin. He was a great performer, but he lacked the deep, granular knowledge. So he used mine. We were a team. I was the engine, he was the brilliant facade." "The map that ended your career," Finch prompted. "The Borgia map," she said, the name tasting like ash. "He brought it in. Claimed a source had found it in a private library in Rome. The board was ecstatic. It was my job to do the full authentication. In my preliminary analysis, I found anomalies. The vellum was right, but the ink had trace elements of modern solvents. Tiny, almost undetectable. I flagged it in my report. I told Marcus we needed to investigate further." Her hands, resting in her lap, clenched into fists. "He told me I was being paranoid, that my instruments were probably miscalibrated. He was so reassuring. He said he'd handle it, that he'd run his own tests. He asked for my raw data files and my password to cross-reference my findings. I gave them to him. Like a fool." The car was silent, a rolling tomb carrying a 3-year-old ghost. A week later, the story broke in the Times. The map was a high-profile fake. The museum was humiliated. An internal investigation was launched. My preliminary report, the one flagging the solvents, was gone from my computer. Deleted. In its place was a forged report with my digital signature, authenticating the map without reservation. When they investigated the leak, the anonymous tip was traced to an IP address from a cybercafe 2 blocks from my apartment. Marcus was the one who discovered the forgery, positioning himself as the hero who saved the museum's reputation. I was the scapegoat, young, overly ambitious, careless. It was the perfect narrative. "And he walked away clean," Finch finished, his voice a low growl. "He walked away with a promotion and a reputation as the sharpest eye in the business," Ilara said, a bitter edge to her voice. "And I walked away with nothing." Finch stared out the window for a long time, the muscles in his jaw working. He was a man who understood betrayal. It was the currency of his world. What he didn't understand was the sheer, galling arrogance of it. "Why did he do it?" Finch asked, turning back to her. "Why risk bringing a fake to you tonight? He knew who you were. He knew you were working there. He had to know you'd see it." "That's the part you don't understand about a narcissist like Marcus," Ilara said, the pieces clicking into place with sickening clarity. "It wasn't a risk. It was the point. It wasn't enough for him to destroy me. He had to know I was watching him succeed. He wanted me to see him sell you that map. He wanted me to pour his wine while he became a legend. It was the final turn of the screw. Finch considered this. He looked at this young woman, her life derailed by a man he had been about to enrich beyond his wildest dreams. He was not a sentimental man. He did not believe in charity, but he believed in enemies. And Marcus Thorne had just made a very powerful one. "He didn't just try to defraud me of $50 million, Finch said, his voice dropping to a dangerous calm. "He tried to make me a fool. He tried to poison my family's legacy with a cheap lie. That is an offense I do not forgive." He leaned forward, his eyes boring into hers. "This map you saw tonight, the Verrazzano chart, does the real one exist?" Ilara's heart skipped a beat. "The scholarship is divided. Most believe it was lost in a fire in the 16th century. But I have a theory. I believe it survived. I believe I know who made the forgery you saw tonight, and I believe Marcus knows where the real one is." "Then you're going to help me find it," Finch stated. It wasn't a job offer. It was a command. "You're going to help me not only recover what is mine, but you are going to help me systematically and completely destroy Marcus Thorne. I will provide the resources. You will provide the expertise and the roadmap." "I'm not a corporate spy, Mr. Finch. I'm an art historian." "Good," he shot back. "I have plenty of spies. I need a scholar. I need someone who knows how he thinks, where he hides his secrets. He built his kingdom on your knowledge. It seems only fitting that you should be the one to burn it to the ground." He pressed a button on his armrest. A panel slid open, revealing a small, chilled bottle of water. He handed it to her. "Your revenge was a beautiful, savage little appetizer," Finch said, a thin, predatory smile gracing his lips for the first time. "But I think you and I are about to prepare a much more substantial meal." Ilara looked at the man who, just hours before, had dismissed her as part of the furniture. This wasn't just a chance at justice. It was a chance to reclaim the life that had been stolen from her. It was a deal with a devil, perhaps, but a devil who wanted the same thing she did. "Where do we start?" she asked. Finch's smile widened. "We start with your theory. Tell me everything you know about a man named Anton Gallo." Finch's office was not an office. It was a private library, a sanctuary of knowledge and power, housed in the penthouse of his own building. 2 stories of floor-to-ceiling bookshelves were filled with rare first editions. An enormous mahogany desk, once owned by a railroad baron, sat before a plate-glass window with a god's-eye view of Central Park. The air smelled of old paper, leather, and money that had been money for a very long time. Ilara, still in her waitress uniform, felt profoundly out of place. Finch, now in a silk dressing gown, gestured for her to sit in a leather armchair that was probably worth more than her entire college education. He sat opposite her, a legal pad and a fountain pen in his hand. There were no assistants, no secretaries. "Anton Gallo," Finch said, his voice echoing slightly in the vast room. "You mentioned him in the car. Begin there." "Anton Gallo is a ghost," Ilara began, finding her footing. The familiar thrill of the intellectual hunt was beginning to chase away the exhaustion. "He's the most brilliant forger of Renaissance maps the world has never heard of. He doesn't sell his work on the open market. He works on commission for a handful of private clients. He's an artist, but his medium is deception. His specialty is creating forgeries that are good enough to fool all but the most rigorous scientific analysis. He's the one who made the Borgia map that ruined me, and I'm certain he's the one who made the Verrazzano chart you saw tonight." "If he's a ghost, how do you know about him?" Finch asked, his pen scratching on the pad. "Because I almost caught him," Ilara said. "During my research for the Borgia authentication, before Marcus shut me down, I found his chemical signature. He uses a custom-blended binder for his pigments, made with linseed oil from a specific region in Umbria. It has a unique trace isotope profile. It's his fingerprint. I was building a case, tracing other potential forgeries with the same binder. I believe Marcus didn't just use Gallo to create the fake. I think he's Gallo's primary client. Marcus finds the buyers, provides the historical research, my research, and Gallo executes the work. They're partners. Finch stopped writing. So to find the real map, we need to find this forger. Exactly. But Gallo is invisible. No credit cards, no property records, no digital footprint. But he has a weakness, Elara said, leaning forward. His materials. The vellum, the rare pigments, the antique inks. You can't buy those on Amazon. He has to have suppliers. Very specialized, very discreet suppliers. For the next 4 hours they worked. Finch, with his immense reach, became her instrument. Elara would name a type of supplier, a dealer in antique books for vellum, a chemical supply house that deals in historical pigments, a specialist in rare minerals, and Finch would get on the phone. His conversations were brief, brutal, and terrifyingly effective. He didn't ask for favors, he called in debts. He threatened, cajoled, and leveraged the financial entanglements he had with half the businesses in the city. Slowly, a picture began to emerge. A small, obscure bookbinder in Queens who had recently placed an unusually large order for 16th century liturgical songbooks, a prime source for blank vellum, a chemical import company in New Jersey that had a recurring, cash-only order for ground lapis lazuli and malachite, shipped to a P.O. box in Brooklyn. "It's not enough," Finch said, hanging up the phone after another dead end. "These are whispers, not evidence. We need a direct link between Gallo and Thorne." Elara stared at the mind map they had been creating on a large whiteboard. Names, locations, transactions. It was a web of shadows. "We're thinking about this backwards," she said suddenly. "We're trying to find Gallo, but Marcus already knows where he is. We need to follow Marcus." "I already have a team on him," Finch said dismissively. "He went home, drank heavily, and is now sleeping it off, awaiting the legal firestorm I'm about to unleash." "No, not his movements. His money," Elara clarified. "A $50 million deal just fell through. If he was planning on paying Gallo, that payment is now on hold. But he has to communicate with him. He can't risk a phone call. He'll have a secure channel, a drop point, something analog." Finch's eyes lit up with a grim understanding. "My security team can access his financial records. What are we looking for?" "Something that doesn't fit," Elara said. "Marcus is a man of expensive, predictable tastes. Michelin star restaurants, Savile Row suits, art auctions. We're looking for a small, recurring payment to a place that makes no sense. A dry cleaner, a flower shop, a bakery, something that can act as a message drop." The sun was beginning to stain the eastern sky, a pale, bruised purple, when Finch's head of security, a humorless ex-Mossad agent named Kobe, delivered a tablet with Marcus's encrypted financial data. Finch handed it to Elara. "You have the context. Find the anomaly." Elara's eyes, trained to spot the slightest inconsistency in a 400-year-old map, scanned the columns of numbers. She saw the payments to his tailor, his wine merchant, his exclusive gym. And then she saw it. A payment of $200 every Friday to a place called The Aviary. "The Aviary?" Finch asked. "A pet shop?" "I don't think so," Elara said, her fingers flying across the tablet, cross-referencing the address. "It's in the West Village. It's not a pet shop. It's a specialist dealer in antique bird cages." Finch stared at her. "Bird cages?" "It's perfect," Elara whispered. a thrill running through her. It's poetic, obscure, a place that deals in beautiful, empty cages. It has to be it. It's a payment for services. He's not buying anything. He's paying for a message to be held or passed along. Finch picked up his phone. Kobe, I have an address for you. A shop called the Aviary. I want full surveillance. I want to know everyone who goes in and out. I want to know what they had for breakfast, and I want a discreet team ready to acquire something for me. The entire shop, if necessary. The next 48 hours were a blur of caffeine and adrenaline. Working from a guest suite in Finch's penthouse that was larger than her entire apartment, Ilara directed a small, ruthlessly efficient army. Kobe's team set up surveillance, planting microscopic cameras and listening devices around the aviary. They watched as the shop's proprietor, a quiet, elderly man, went about his business. On Friday afternoon, it happened. Marcus Thorne, looking haggard and paranoid, entered the shop. He didn't browse. He walked to the counter, handed the proprietor an envelope, and left 5 minutes later. An hour after that, a new man arrived. He was unassuming, dressed like a college professor, and he carried a worn leather satchel. He spoke with the proprietor, was handed the same envelope, and left. "We have him." Kobe's voice crackled over the speakerphone. "He's on foot. Do we take him?" "No," Ilara said instantly. "Follow him. He's the artist. He's Gallo. He's going back to his studio. That's where the real map is. That's where the evidence is." The team shadowed Gallo to a nondescript brownstone in Brooklyn. He entered the basement apartment, and the lights came on. "Now what?" Finch asked, pacing the library. "We can't just break in. A warrant would take days, and it would tip Thorne off." "We don't need a warrant," Ilara said, a slow, audacious plan forming in her mind. "Gallo is a craftsman. He'll have a workshop. He'll have ventilation for the chemicals he uses. Kobe's team needs to get a sample from his air vent." Finch relayed the order. An hour later, the report came back. A technician on Kobe's team ran a portable gas chromatograph on the air sample. The results were conclusive. The air contained trace amounts of a unique chemical compound, the specific Umbrian linseed oil binder, Ilara's fingerprint. "It's him," Ilara breathed. "He's in there and he's working. It's a start," Finch growled. "But it's not the map." "No," Ilara agreed. "But now we know where the nest is, and Marcus is about to lead us right to the egg." She looked at Finch, her eyes gleaming with a cold fire. "Marcus thinks he's lost the deal. But his real problem is his partner. He owes a very dangerous artist a lot of money. He's going to have to sell the one thing of value he has left." "The real map," Finch finished. "He'll have to retrieve it from wherever he's hidden it, and bring it to Gallo as payment or collateral," Ilara explained. "He's desperate. He'll get sloppy, and when he moves, we'll be waiting." The trap was set. All they had to do now was wait for the panicked, greedy man to walk into it. The boardroom at Finch Industries was a place of profound silence, 65 stories above the city. It was a room designed to intimidate, with a single, massive table of polished granite and chairs that cost more than a family car. The far wall was a sheet of glass, offering a panoramic, almost insulting view of the city below. At the head of the table sat Alistair Finch, his face an unreadable mask of stone. At his right, his chief legal counsel. The other chairs were empty. At precisely 11 o'clock, the door hissed open. Marcus Thorne entered. He looked terrible. His expensive suit was rumpled, his face was pale and slick with sweat, and his eyes darted around the room like a cornered animal. He had clearly been expecting a room full of lawyers, not this cold, empty stage. "Alistair," he began, his voice hoarse. "I know you're angry. But this is a misunderstanding. That woman, she's a pathological liar. Sit down, Marcus, Finch said, his voice quiet, but carrying the weight of absolute command. Marcus sat. The silence stretched, thick and uncomfortable. We have a great deal to discuss, Finch said finally. But first, I believe you're expecting another guest. As if on cue, the door opened again. A man in his late 60s, with the gentle, scholarly air of a university professor, was escorted in by two of Finch's security guards. He carried a long, flat tube of reinforced cardboard. It was Anton Gallo. His face was ashen with terror. Marcus's jaw dropped. He stared at Gallo, then back at Finch, his mind struggling to process the impossible. What is this? Who is this man? He stammered. You know who he is, Finch said. He's your partner, your artist. We had a long talk with Mr. Gallo last night, after my associates apprehended him leaving your apartment with this. Finch nodded to one of the guards, who took the cardboard tube from Gallo and placed it on the table. You see, Marcus, you did exactly what my new consultant predicted you would, Finch continued, his voice a low, chilling monologue. You got desperate. You needed to pay your forger, so you went to retrieve your only real asset, the real Verrazzano chart. You kept it in a climate-controlled storage unit in your name. Not very clever. My team was watching you. They watched you retrieve the tube. They watched you go to Gallo's apartment. And they watched Gallo leave with it. He was surprisingly cooperative when we explained his legal options. Marcus was hyperventilating, his carefully constructed world crumbling around him in real time. He told us everything, Finch said. He told us about your partnership, how you would provide the research, stolen research as it turns out, and he would execute the forgeries. He told us about the Borgia map. He even kept a detailed ledger, Marcus. He's an artist, after all. He documents his work. The door opened a third time. This time it was Elara. She was no longer in her waitress uniform. She was wearing a simple, elegant, dark grey dress, her hair pulled back. She looked calm, composed, and powerful. She was holding a file folder. She walked to the table and stood directly opposite Marcus, placing the folder on the polished granite. Marcus stared at her, his expression a cocktail of pure, undiluted hatred and utter disbelief. You! He hissed, the word filled with venom. You did this, a waitress. She's not a waitress, Marcus, Finch corrected him. She is Dr. Elara Vance, and she is the new director of the Finch Foundation for Art Authentication and Recovery. Her first official act was overseeing the analysis of the contents of that tube. Elara opened the folder. With steady hands, she pulled out a series of large, glossy photographs. They were microscopic images of ink, of vellum, of pigment. The Verrazzano chart is authentic, she said, her voice clear and steady. And Mr. Gallo's confession is corroborated by the chemical evidence found in his studio, which matches the forgeries he created for you perfectly. She then pulled out a final document and slid it across the table to Marcus. It was a copy of her original research paper on the Borgia map's inconsistencies, the one he had stolen and deleted. Mr. Gallo also kept this, Elara said. He said you gave it to him as a trophy. He didn't realize it was a record of your crime. It's my original analysis, Marcus, with my signature, the one you claimed never existed. The final piece of the trap snapped shut. It was over. There was no escape, no explanation, no lie big enough to cover this. Marcus Thorne did not scream. He did not rage. He simply slumped in his chair, a broken man. The charismatic facade dissolved, revealing the small, hollow fraud beneath. You have two options, Marcus, Finch said, his voice devoid of any emotion. Option 1. I turn all of this evidence, the map, Gallo's confession, Dr. Vance's testimony, over to the district attorney. You will be prosecuted for fraud, conspiracy, and a dozen other felonies. You will spend the rest of your life in prison, and I will personally finance the prosecution to ensure it." He paused, letting the words sink in. "Or," he continued, "option 2. You will sign a full confession. You will publicly exonerate Dr. Vance, stating that you framed her to cover your own incompetence. You will then liquidate every asset you own, your apartment, your art collection, your stocks, and you will transfer the full amount to the Metropolitan Museum of an Acquisition Fund as an anonymous donation. Then you will disappear. If I ever see your name in a newspaper again, if I ever hear of you so much as consulting on the authenticity of a child's drawing, I will enact option 1. The choice is yours." It wasn't a choice. It was a life sentence, served outside of a prison cell. It was total, complete erasure. Marcus, his hands shaking, reached for the pen. The Finch Foundation for Art Authentication and Recovery was housed not in a sterile office building, but in a restored brownstone in the Upper East Side. It was a place of quiet study, filled with microscopes, spectrographs, and the hushed reverence of a library. 6 months later, Ilara stood before a large work table. Unrolled before her was the Verrazzano chart, its delicate lines and faded colors a testament to half a millennium of survival. It was here on a long-term loan from the Finch collection, the centerpiece of the Foundation's launch. The news of Marcus Thorne's spectacular fall from grace had been a brief, vicious scandal in the art world, before he had vanished completely. Ilara Vance's name had been cleared, her reputation restored not just to its former state, but elevated to something legendary. Alistair Finch walked into the room, leaning on an old, elegant cane. He stood beside her, looking down at the map. "It's beautiful," he said, his voice softer than she had ever heard it. "To think of the journey it took to get here." He wasn't just talking about the map. "You know," he said, turning to her, a rare, small smile on his face. "I've been thinking about what you said that night in the restaurant, about the forger being lazy, mixing his centuries. It's a common mistake," Ilara said. "Hubris." "Indeed," Finch said. "It seems to me that Marcus's biggest mistake was the same. He saw a waitress, and he never bothered to look closer. He completely misjudged the century he was living in." Ilara looked from the old man to the ancient map. Her life had been a forgery for 3 years, a cheap copy of what it was supposed to be. But now, surrounded by the tools of her trade, by the quiet pursuit of truth, she was authentic again. She had not been rescued. She had, with the right leverage, rescued herself. "He didn't misjudge the century," she replied, her fingers gently tracing the coastline of a world made new. "He just forgot who wrote the book on it."